Accusations of miscalculation were also fended off by the head of the area's fire service. Appliances were not nearby, he said, because of the risk of being shot at. This afternoon, 5 of the 9 survivors were taken to court, having spent the night in prison. Among them, the 2 Britons, Rinos Avram, who suffered second-degree burns in his arm, and Derek Lovelock at the back of the group.
What about the children? Why the fire?
He said to reporters that the FBI had started the fire by kicking over a lantern. All 5 will be charged with being material witnesses to the original murder of 4 federal agents in February. They're now material witnesses to a list of murders of horrifying proportions, the ramifications of which are still being felt right across this country. Matthew Amrediwala, BBC News, Waco in Texas.
Here, the Prime Minister ruled out new laws to control extremist religious cults in Britain. He told MPs it was too difficult to say what was a cult and what wasn't. Today, the families of the Britons at Waco were trying to find out whether their relatives were among those who died. Laurie Margolis reports.
Samuel Henry lost 6 of his family in the inferno at Waco. His wife Zilla, 2 sons and 3 daughters, pictured here some years ago, all died at the sect compound.
I saw everything that happened from the fire started. And I've never felt as bad in all my life, the history of my life, as I felt there. When I realized that my family, my 5 children, my blood, was in that place. My wife and 5 children. I just cannot find words to express my feelings.
Christella Kyriakou thought at first she'd lost her brother, Rinos Avram, but he did survive, fleeing the compound as it burned and now facing legal proceedings. His sister wonders what kind of person has emerged.
It got to the stage where you spoke to him and he was speaking back to you in the words of the Bible, not normal speech. He was, well, completely brainwashed by it.
There are those who saw through David Koresh and escaped his influence. Tony Kakuri is back in the reassuringly mundane surroundings of his North London market stall. He explains how the cult trapped its adherents.
It was not like religion, it was more like a concentration camp where people had to obey Koresh, you know, a sort of rule by fear, intimidation, and nobody could step out of line. If anybody stepped out of line, he was like down on them like a ton of bricks. You just got trapped. You got this fear like, oh no, what this man is saying is true, and I can't pull out because God's gonna destroy me. He taught that God would kill anybody who rejects his message, and that he would kill you if you reject his message.
At Westminster, the Prime Minister dismissed calls for new legislation against cults.
It would be difficult to focus legislation to restrict the establishment of those cults or religious movements, because it would be very difficult to determine what groups should be included in the legislation and what excluded.
The Home Office suggested that extremist cults could be controlled under existing legislation. Under the Immigration Act of 1971, the government can deport or exclude people such as cult leaders if that's considered conducive to the public good. Criminal law could be used against cults if it could be proved that they committed crimes such as kidnapping, assault or threatening behaviour while recruiting members or persuading them to stay. Cult experts point out one vital difference between Britain and America.
I think the main difference between the average cult in Britain and the cult in Waco, Texas, has simply been the...
It's burned fiercely. Officials say it's still too early to recover bodies. They believe children died apart from their parents in women's dormitories. ITN's Bill Neely is in Waco.
Across the still smouldering embers, a long line and a slow search today for what's left of an apocalyptic cult and the 86 people who burned to death for it. A hellish scene illuminated now and then by the sight and sound of exploding ammunition. A day when the FBI said it did nothing to cause this fiasco.
Those children are dead because David Koresh had them killed. There's no question about that. He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die. We didn't have anything to do with their deaths.
But these are worried FBI men. They can't explain why they had to assault the compound, though they suggest, offering no evidence, that children were suffering inside.
Well, how would the federal government look when we finally get in the compound? There are children dying of hunger, or children dying of disease because of the conditions.
That's a smokescreen, and it's designed to divert the attention away from what really happened, and that was abuse of authority.
Of the 9 who survived the inferno, 2 are British, Derek Lovelock and Renus Avram. One today denying that any cult member started the fire. The FBI today described how a man was seen setting a fire. Other questions arise as to why the FBI had no plan whatsoever in the event of fire.
So if we'd have had 5 fire trucks lying around that place with all the water in the world with that wind, I don't think we could have slowed that fire down 1 iota.
The truth is the FBI had put no fire engines on standby. Firemen were watching the blaze on television. After 25 minutes, the first engine arrived. It had been held back at a roadblock. As the fire raged, some clearly jumped to safety. Yet both the FBI and the government insist on calling this a mass suicide they were powerless to prevent. The FBI has no idea how many inside wanted to die. The Attorney General, who approved the plan, and the President, who today took full responsibility for it, are throwing much of the blame on David Koresh.
He killed those he controlled, and he bears ultimate responsibility for the carnage that ensued. They made the decision to immolate themselves, and I regret it terribly, and I feel awful about the children.
Koresh had promised them paradise and gave them this. In the end, 17 children under 10 died huddled together in an upstairs room.